Hey, what's happening everybody? Pragmatic Addict here. Great to see you guys. This is going to be my review of the new BJ Novak directorial debut, Vengeance. All I'm going to say really quickly, guys, is these Office cast members, first John Krasinski with A Quiet Place, now BJ Novak with Vengeance. All I'm saying is, Steve Carell, if you're watching, we're waiting on you, buddy. You're next. So upon seeing this movie, I didn't really know what the exact genre that this movie was going for. I heard from a lot of outlets that this was kind of going for like the dark comedy thriller, maybe even like horror, route. It is worth noting that this is also produced from Blumhouse Productions. I also didn't know exactly where this film's centerpiece was. As we see in the trailers, BJ Novak, this girl that he hooked up with supposedly dies of an overdose, but that is pretty much all we are left with. As far as the title card, Vengeance, I didn't really exactly know where that actually, came into play. I didn't know exactly, again, what the movie was going to be really focusing on as far as where BJ Novak's character takes place and where the actual story goes. So I will say this really quickly, right off the bat, the film does address that, and it does make its point very clear, and literally, again, this is opening shot, where this film is going to go, and what's actually going on here, in comparison to what the trailer actually, kind of depicts. And I'm not saying all this to be cryptic or anything, it's just that this film wasn't exactly concrete, at least in the trailers, what it was actually going to be focusing on and where its story was actually going to go. And I gotta say, as somebody who was kind of worried about that going into the movie, it does take care of business right, right from the get-go. And it honestly does it in a really, pretty capturing way, too. It wasn't just the point of oh wow, okay, I know where this film is going now, I know what's going on here. But it does it in a way where, just alone from that scene, how it opens up and where this film actually, again, opens with, I was on board immediately just from that scene. And again, I'm not trying to sound cryptic, but I am not going to spoil the scene just because of how much fun I actually had with it. And now I have to say, as far as BJ Novak's character goes, as far as the character introductions for the movie, one thing I wasn't exactly expecting was to be entirely grabbed by BJ Novak as a character in this movie. I am not completely familiar with his work, again, other than obviously Ryan from The Office. There just wasn't much expectations I could have had going into this movie as far as, again, his character goes. But I will say, I was grabbed immediately. You see, obviously, so yes, this is a, directorial debut from BJ Novak. He's the writer, director, producer, star of this film. And you can see how much passion is not just put into his acting, but in this film. But because we were talking about, the subject of his acting, he really works as a specific actor writing this specific role for himself. And honestly, he does it very effortlessly, in the sense of how, he contributed to The Office. So obviously, he wasn't, so Ryan from The Office, he wasn't a huge, character to me. He wasn't a huge standout. Obviously, he was a main role, and he was, a pretty known character as far as The Office goes, and very just kind of in the background more so. It didn't showcase a whole lot of this character, but again, Brian Novak as Ryan is a pretty iconic character, in and of itself. And I gotta say, this film, it feels like you feel that BJ Novak is aware of the success, of his character from The Office, that, that is what he's known for mostly. And I gotta say, he kind of brings to this character kind of what we've seen as his, portrayal of Ryan in The Office. Just kind of this, sleazy, just kind of, dickish, kind of, awkward, uncomfortable character. Only in this case of this movie, this is more of a murder, mystery, thriller, deadpan, kind of dark comedy. And now, while I have spilled the beans that yes, this is a murder mystery, let's get into the actual plot here. So the plot here is basically BJ Novak plays this writer who attends a funeral to a girl he hooked up with a few times who supposedly dies of an overdose, which there actually starts being suspicions that that may not actually be the case, and that she was possibly murdered. Now again, this was a girl that he just kind of hooked up with, but his family actually sees him much, bigger than what he actually was in, as far as, to this girl, to this kind of, fling that they had. And what's fun about this movie, what I really was like, oh, wow, that's actually pretty fucking fun of a concept, is that while this is the plot of the movie, this is the story, as BJ Novak does play this writer, he basically uses this plot as, the center and the idea for his next story that he's going to write. And basically when he pitches this idea to his agent, she's like, okay, we'll just, settle up with the family, get comfortable with them, lay low for a little while, get to know them, see what you can, gather for this story. And basically once he does settle in with his family, and we're introduced to this family of this girl, they are immediately your basic stereotypical Texan family. And I gotta say, while this formula is pretty familiar, the set of actors brings just so much to these characters, and honestly to this movie, like Novak does to his character. And even the more dramatic scenes of this movie, what it comes down to is how well the emotion is handled in this movie. And that's just, in the vast majority of it. Whether it be, again, the more dramatic scenes, the humorous ones, the kind of darker ones. There are a lot of tropes in this movie and a lot of cliches, but what makes this one stand out is how passionate BJ Novak is about this, film of his. Now, as far as the film's pacing goes, getting from one thing to the next, that is, in my opinion, by far the weakest aspect of the film. Because the film does keep itself pretty, low-key and pretty cryptic and mysterious, which is fine, especially for this type of movie. But with that being said, there are a lot of, scenes and, plot points in this movie that you just kind of got to accept, and they actually really do feel like that, where you can see the passion and the craft behind it, and the film up to this point has been more or less pretty engaging, that, again, you do just kind of gotta put up with it. But I would say that it's actually to the point where it either really hits or really misses. It's either, incredible work and it's laugh out loud, or, again, whatever the, emotion being displayed is, it really does, have that effect, or it's just really forgettable and you could just honestly not even give a fuck about it. And then there are times that felt really just kind of alienated from the movie itself, where, random characters do come in to showcase maybe a random talent from this character. And while these scenes are just here to kind of showcase a certain thing or for a certain actor or whatever, as far as a connection to the movie individually, it felt very fucking strange. But going back to BJ Novak's character now, as he's settled in with his family, he's basically here, because he is a podcaster as well, and he's basically here, interviewing people that, were, connected to the person or are familiar with the area that the events, took place. And one of those characters is actually a producer played by Ashton Kutcher. And while I thought Ashton Kutcher as an actor did fine in this movie, he was basically here as a supporting role more than anything. He is a very come and go kind of character, and he, I think that as an actor he did, I guess, fine. He didn't have too much to work with, but what he did, I think he did fine. It did feel like it was in that case of just kind of having the display of Ashton Kutcher in your movie. But again, this just does kind of go into what I was saying earlier, where, certain characters just kind of come in, or certain things are addressed just to kind of showcase a specific kind of thing. And while I think it's fine to do that, it just, as far as again, connection to the film, it doesn't really feel like it's all that structured. And I will say this, is that as the movie did go on, it did start to feel, it did start to do a little bit less for me, for a while as it did go on. And while the main subject is, consistently, addressed and in the background, again, unraveling this, mystery, this death to this girl, while that is consistently at play, this does kind of feel like a buddy comedy in a sense, with, BJ Novak in this really ridiculously kind of written Texan family, where they're going to all these different crazy, goofy, wild obstacles. They're going to a rodeo and everything, and then there's a scene where BJ Novak gets in this NASCAR fucking thing or whatever. I don't know what to fucking call it. I didn't grow up in Texas, but what I'm trying to say here, what I'm getting at is that, like, these things, like, again, as far as, like, plot points, they don't really work. And I feel like, honestly, without saying this, they are fine, but this is a film that is very suited for a certain audience. It is, set in Texas with a Texas family with a lot of, Texas culture and stereotypes to it. And again, while I thought that, as far as humor goes, some of them worked, more or less, some of them didn't. It is, like, in the sense of, like, just for me, as me as an audience, it's just kind of like setting and direction just didn't work for me personally. But now I will say this though, getting to, not even like in the last act itself, but getting to the last act, the film does start to take a much deeper focus on the actual subject that we are here, to kind of digest this, mystery of this girl's death. The movie does really start to, like, full throttle just, like, focus on this story, but not just the story, but, like, something that really impressed me about this kind of areas of the film is that it immediately shifts tonally as well, to this area of the movie. Like, just how well Novak, displayed, like, how well he can just slingshot from not only, like, different tones, but something, like, just centering on, like, Texas tropes and Texan humor for a long time, and then just going into something this dramatic this well. It was extremely impressive, and it just, like, just how fast he was able to reel me back into the story and get me, engaged just right as I was in the beginning. I was extremely impressed by it. Now, I will say this. In the last act now, Novak's acting is easily some of the best acting that he has actually displayed from his career to this point. And I will say that, with all this being said, being the writer of this film, playing a writer, it just made these performances so much more, well done. And especially, as a way to go out as an actor of, a movie like this. And lastly, I will say this now. The film's ending, the film's conclusion, to me, it wasn't anything jaw-dropping or really, like, explosive or unraveling even. But like Novak has displayed throughout this movie, how well he can handle and juggle, different themes and different emotions, just, especially tonally, and how far he can take that just, in an instant. This film was very climatic in its case, as far as emotional value goes. And what it comes down to is, however you look at this film, there is a lot of emotion and a lot of power in, BJ Novak's grasp as a director, and especially, coming from a directorial effort. And I will say that the final note I will say that this film did for me is that Novak is an extremely smart and extremely talented, director, now I can say. And I will say that this made me take him way more seriously and is going to, leave me keeping an eye on him in the future much more than I ever would have. Overall, guys, I do think that this is still suited for a specific audience, but there is a lot to gain from this. But again, in saying that, there is a lot that you just have to kind of accept as well. And overall, I'm going to give this a solid 4.2 to a 4.3 at least out of 10. And overall, I was kind of feeling like a more, positive to mixed review. But again, with all that I gained, like, not only the good against the weaker, but how far that good actually went, I'm going to give this an overall positive review. Guys, that was my review on BJ Novak's directorial debut, Vengeance. It was a pretty rewarding film. I don't think that it is, one of the best films of the year, but I think that for a directorial debut from someone like BJ Novak, who isn't exactly, one of the most known A-list actors or anything, this is going to have people keeping a much closer eye on him. So yes, guys, that is going to do it for my review of Vengeance. Let me know if you guys did see this movie, what you thought of it, as well as my review down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next week with another set of reviews fresh out of that week, and I hope you guys are having a great night. Thank you so much for watching, and take care, guys.